Well, I was intending to put this on later, but things are moving so quickly now, it's hard to keep up. So the rest of the articles will follow on from this. Peter Hitchens is very highly critical of sections of the police force. Actually, I remember in 2010 it was proposed that everyone should have an identity card, and the police were all for it in a big way. But it was thrown out. As somebody said, being required to carry ID cards at all times and show them to the authorities on demand is not a very British tradition. Many find the idea of being instructed to show your papers at any given time appalling. Now, I'm one of those few who's still got his original ID card, which we got during the war. Irrespective of your age, you got one. And they weren't abolished until 1954, which is almost 10 years after the war. And and this is it. It didn't contain a photograph, which I found a bit odd. You could have lent it to somebody of the same age. When you moved, you got a little slip to stick in. I mean, the police have a difficult job, no two ways about it. I mean, they have to deal with some terrible situations, and of course, they never know what the risks are going to be when they leave home in the morning. And the vast majority of them are very sensible in their dealings with the public. Unfortunately, there's a fair minority who aren't. They tend to be verbally aggressive and have a very bullying manner, which makes many situations a lot worse than they were. We often see it in reality TV programmes about the police. Sorry, the cops, which I think do more harm than good. Courtesy costs nothing on both sides. And one of the worst aspects is this business of asking your neighbours to spy on you and send information into them that you've been breaking the rules. That really sounds like East Berlin and a Stasi. Absolutely appalling. This article appeared in the Northern Echo recently. York woman fined £660 for breaching coronavirus lockdown rules. It appeared on April the 1st. The first person to be arrested on the railways for breaching the new coronavirus lockdown rules has been fined £660. God, that's an unbelievable amount. Marie Denou from York was found loitering between platforms, quote, at Newcastle Central Station at around 8 AM on Saturday, as she apparently tried to travel, British Transport Police said. She would not explain to police why she needed to travel or give her name, and was arrested on suspicion of breaking restrictions imposed under the Coronavirus Act 2020. Dino appeared at North Tyneside Magistrates Court on Monday and was fined £660 for breaching the pandemic rules, a member of the court staff said. She was also ordered to pay a victim surcharge of £66 and costs of £85. British Transport Police Assistant Chief Constable Sean O'Callaghan said, while a ticket offence has also been committed in this case, enforcement of any sort under the new regulations is really a last resort, especially arrest. In this case, officers tried their utmost best to engage with Denou. I can assure you that we would much rather not have to take such action. We strongly urge the public to do the right thing and help us save lives by staying at home and slowing the spread of the virus. Under Schedule 21 of the Coronavirus Act, it is illegal to fail to comply with the instructions of police officers without reasonable excuse. Well, who decides what's reasonable? Well, the police do, of course. Reasonable is something which comes up quite often in court cases, and the definition seems to be that it is something that a reasonable person would accept. But when I've come to look at what is a reasonable person, the sort of average man in the street, even the best legal beagles, the best legal brains in the country, don't seem able to decide what it means. I mean, most of us would regard ourselves as reasonable, but others might have a different opinion. Now today, which is the 3rd of April, there was an update. A woman who was fined £660 for breaking new coronavirus lockdown rules could have her conviction set aside after it emerged police misinterpreted the legislation. Marie Denou, 41, from York, was arrested at Newcastle Central Station on Saturday after she allegedly failed to tell officers why she needed to travel, British Transport Police said. She was arrested on suspicion of breaking restrictions imposed under the Coronavirus Act 2020 and subsequently found at North Tyneside Magistrates Court on Monday. But the British Transport Police said that following a joint review with the Crown Prosecution Services, CPS, it had established, in fact they were told, that she was charged under the incorrect section of the Coronavirus Act. The British Transport Police said it has now agreed to contact the court and ask for the case to be relisted and the conviction set aside. Under Schedule 21 of the Coronavirus Act, it is illegal to fail to comply with the instructions of police officers without reasonable excuse. There's that reasonable word again. It would seem that even if you're not breaking the law by, for example, travelling by car to get some exercise a long way from other people, you can still be fined or arrested for not complying with the instruction of the police. It's a case of heads they win, tails you lose. How in God's name has it come to this? This second article appeared. Officers from the Royal Military Police, good heavens, and the North Yorkshire Force, that's the North Yorkshire Police Force, manned checkpoints yesterday in an operation to combat unnecessary public travel. With new regulations now in force to reduce the spread of coronavirus, officers from Richmond Neighbourhood Police Team, along with soldiers from the Royal Military Police, were out in public conducting road checks across the district at Catterick Garrison and Leyburn. Generally, most people were complying with the new government instructions by travelling to buy essential. Oh, I seem to have missed out. Essential goods. Or were key workers going to or from work. A considerable number were driving to take their daily exercise. Helena Gwatkin, a PCSO, I don't know what that is, who spoke to motorists, was surprised by a minority who, if not directly breaking the rules, were certainly bending them. She said, "I spoke to a woman at Catterick Garrison who was en route to Aysgarth from Darlington for some fresh air. I sent her home. I also spoke to an elderly couple who had driven from Leyburn to do some non-essential shopping." The patrols also made their presence felt outside shops and supermarkets where the shoppers were queuing. The sight of officers conducting the high visibility operation was welcomed by the public, who approached the police from a safe distance and praised them. No fines were issued. In charge of the operation was Inspector Mark G, or Mark G, who was pleased they got the message out. He said, "I'm very grateful to the military police who joined us today. We are out explaining to people that unless they fit the government criteria, they should be at home." Most people were legitimately going about their business. However, a significant number were driving to locations to take exercise. If this isn't against the law, it's certainly against the spirit of it. We will continue to conduct these checks across Richmondshire day and night. If everybody follows the guidance, it will save lives and protects the NHS. And then this somewhat unsettling statement. Checkpoints across the county will be unannounced and could appear anywhere, anytime. Assistant Chief Constable Mike Walker said, "I know the vast majority of people will follow the restrictions without question, as they have done so already. I think we should question the restrictions. And as the legislation comes into force, the roadside checks will help us to reinforce the messaging. So we ask people not to make non-essential journeys and to understand the definition of essential. We sincerely hope that we won't have to resort to enforcement action, but if people do not comply, we will." And this is from me. Who decides what is the definition of essential? I mean, whilst there is no ambiguity if someone is going to buy a wardrobe, there is a strong argument that for those who are at high risk of catching the coronavirus and the stress that causes, allowance should be made for them if they wish to exercise well away from other people in the wide open countryside. There are those who have been in self-isolation for weeks under severe stress, especially those who live alone, whose mental health would be greatly improved by a drive into the countryside, even if they didn't get out of the car. Well, who decides this definition of essential? Well, the police decide. I mean, when were they qualified to determine mental health? I am reminded of this statement. During a case involving a former policeman at Teesside Crown Court on the 4th of February 2019, the judge, His Honour Sean Morris, added, "This is misconduct in a public office, and the fact of the matter is that the honesty and integrity of officials, especially the police, is crucial to public trust and essential to the social fabric and economic welfare of this country. If the public cannot trust the police and those who work for them, that will break down. Policing is a splendid and noble profession, and often our police are asked to do unpleasant and dangerous things. But the moment their word can no longer be believed is the moment society descends towards anarchy." Powerful stuff. What do you do if you decide the police have been unreasonable? Well, once the magistrate's court's finished with you, you can appeal against the conviction, if that's what happens. And of course it's then taken to a higher court. And there you're going to need a solicitor and a barrister, a QC. And they come at several £100 an hour. I mean, you might be lucky and find a barrister who's prepared to take it on a no-win, no-fee basis. But such higher courts are for the foolish, the determined and the rich. And at the end of the day, if you lose, you may find that you're not only paying your own costs of several £1,000s, but you're paying the opposition costs of several £1,000s. And if it's the police, they have access to unlimited public funds, and so their legal team will be particularly strong. It's a sad state of affairs, but higher courts are not for the poor. They're not even, they're not even for the comfortably off. I watched Matt Hancock, who was the Health Secretary last night, it was the 2nd of April, giving his coronavirus update. The government has written off 13 billion of NHS debt. I was incensed. If they spent just half of that on the NHS since they came to power, we probably wouldn't be in this mess. And the next controversial thing, he announced a target of 100,000 tests for coronavirus a day by the 30th of April. Well, we will see. Obviously the priority will be the healthcare staff. But then what? There are thousands, if not millions, who have had the disease and could be going about their lives. Spring is a wonderful season, but for many elderly people, there may not be many more. No more visiting our woods and meadows to see the bluebells, or to hear the dawn chorus, or listen to a soaring skylark, or watch hares frolicking. For some, they will never experience such joys again, even if they've had the virus and are immune to it, because they don't have any proof, because they haven't been tested. More than 1.5 million people live alone in the United Kingdom and are trapped because of this testing fiasco. The decision not to test was taken on or about March the 16th. Who made that decision? And on what advice? And who gave them that advice? I think these are questions which will come out in an inquiry at the end. The countries including South Korea, Taiwan and Singapore, which adopted an early massive testing programme, have reduced deaths and removed the lockdown quickly. By the time the government, that's our government, had changed its mind at the end of March, it was too late, as other countries had cornered the market in testing kits and chemicals. And all testing in this country of those who reported sick was carried out by just one laboratory. I think it was the Public Health Executive Laboratory in North London. And they were only doing 500 a day. And they were very reluctant to see this expanded to other public and private facilities, which had been offering their services for weeks. One anonymous academic suggested that there was a kind of fiefdom there. In other words, they wanted to keep all the data for themselves. Sort of data meant power, and they were very reluctant to give it up. The excuse peddled by the health service was that some of the tests were inaccurate, and it would be better to have no tests than bad tests. However, Germany and the countries mentioned above have had no such worries. It was an insulting sob. The testing situation has been an absolute shambles, and there's no getting away from it. Britain is a nation of gardeners, and one of the pleasures, particularly of the elderly, is visiting garden centres to collect their seeds and bedding plants and seed potatoes, etc. Or just meander, just enjoy the colours and the scents. For some cockeyed reason, this is not allowed. It's not seen as essential. I mean, who made that decision? It's good exercise for the body and mental health. And I don't think sufficient thought has been given to the mental health effect of confinement for weeks. I mean, when they talk about exercise, they seem to be talking about physical exercise, walking, running, swimming, although swimming pools are probably closed. But the mental effect of this confinement is immense. I suspect there will be a big increase in the numbers of domestic abuse. A huge number of children have torrid home lives normally, and now they're confined to the house all day for weeks on end. That can only increase dramatically because the schools are shut. Schools were a refuge for such children. I mean, it may be that they were very disruptive at school, but they weren't suffering the abuse which they were getting at home. I mean, that will have increased dramatically. There's nobody there checking up on these houses. I mean, these aren't houses which were under the auspices of social services. They were the sort of hardcore houses, or hardcore families. But there are millions more who don't come under the social services umbrella. I'd like to talk a little bit about mental well-being. The television is full of clips at the moment showing people having a thoroughly jolly time in isolation, making video clips and communicating by the internet. Loneliness is endemic in this country. There are 1.5 million people living on their own in the United Kingdom, and tens of thousands are having a particularly rough time of it. And such clips only serve to rub it in. Loneliness is not just confined to single people. Couples and children also suffer from it. Many elderly people have neither the computers nor the skills to join in this internet jollity. Many, already depressed, are at their wits' end. This is a quote from the 2017 Pandemic Flu Strategy Report, which I'll deal with later. In paragraph 9.2, it says this: overall, the scientific evidence base for developing policy and/or guidance on social measures is limited. Even more limited is the evidence on the cost impacts of these measures and the understanding of how people will think and behave in response to social measures. And in this crucial sentence, a better understanding of these social and psychological factors is a key gap in our understanding. The sentence highlighted in red is of particular significance to this group, as a psychological factor has been completely ignored in this COVID crisis, especially when it comes to restriction of movement and the heavy hand of the police in some authorities. For the most vulnerable in our society, it is probably of far more importance than physical exercise. Nobody seems to care. Their sense of isolation is extreme. And then we come to this. Nobody's ever mentioned this. Unbelievably. In the United Kingdom, every 10 years, a team of experts meet to devise a strategy to be deployed in the event of a flu pandemic. And the two most recent were in 2007 and 2017. And they are a real eye-opener in the light of what's happened in the last month. This is the first of them, which you'll see there, it's 2011. I think I said 2007, but it's 2011. And I won't look at that, Look at the more recent one, the 2017 one. So this is it, the 2017 version. Note the heading. Overarching government strategy to respond to a pandemic, influenza. Making government work better. And this is the foreword to it, which is quite interesting. Probably worth reading this. The possibility of a worldwide influenza pandemic presents a real and daunting challenge to the economic and social well-being of any country, and a serious risk to the health of its population. The Civil Contingency Secretariat and the Department of Health have therefore placed a significant emphasis on planning and preparing for a pandemic now, to ensure that the UK is well prepared to deal with a pandemic when it emerges. Well, that's a statement and a half, considering where we are now. We understand that public confidence in the government's pandemic strategy depends on it being based on a credible and wide-ranging evidence base, which has been objectively analysed. This enables informed decisions and ensures that all options are explored to their full potential. With this in mind, the Cabinet Office has led a group of experts again, from across government in analysing the evidence available on possible measures to reduce the impact of an influenza pandemic. This paper summarises this work. It aims to provide a snapshot of the available scientific evidence underpinning the spectrum of possible strategies to respond to pandemic influenza. It covers both the medical and social countermeasures available, including those proposed by the UK and defined in the National Framework for Responding to an Influenza Pandemic. That was an earlier document, 1997, I think. We hope that it will provide scientists and the public with more detailed evidence to underpin the UK strategy and information on why certain decisions have been taken. Our understanding of the science surrounding possible medical and social countermeasures is likely to change and progress over time. As a result, the science covered in this paper will need to be reviewed as more evidence becomes available. In turn, assumptions, presumptions, and response options will also need to be modified. We would expect to develop the evidence base in parallel with the development and refinement of the UK strategy. This advice was produced by the Cabinet Office in consultation with the health departments and with other government departments. The Cabinet Office has issued it as part of our role in supporting the Department of Health as lead department in preparing and planning for a possible influenza pandemic. Signed, Mr. Bruce Mann. Well, what happened to that? They might as well have thrown it in a bin. Let's have a look at the contents. It's a very technical document. I mean, I've had a look at it, and I don't intend to read all of these out. You can peruse it at your leisure. I'll just pick out one or two things which perhaps are relevant to the current situation. I mean, there it mentions under social measures, domestic travel restrictions it talks about. It also talks about school closures and mass gatherings. There's a list of figures and tables there. word modelling appears there a couple of times. So, they are the contents. There are 71 pages in this document. This is another one which is particularly relevant. An estimated 12,000, mainly elderly people, die each year from seasonal influenza in England and Wales. Well, that seems at the bottom of the scale compared with some of the estimates I've said. The general consensus is it's around 17,000 in total. With Hong Kong flu, it varied between 33,000 and 80,000 deaths in England, well, in the United Kingdom. And there's a doctor, MD, an anonymous doctor who posts on Private Eye, and he talks about 60,000 deaths, and that will come up later in an article by Peter Hitchens. In that paragraph 3.7 there, they're obviously very well aware that a new type of flu will emerge. Not the normal winter flu, which you can control to a certain extent by flu jabs. That paragraph 323 is very relevant. In the absence of early or effective interventions, society is also likely to face much wider social and economic disruption, significant threats to the continuity of essential services, lower production levels, shortage and distribution difficulties. Individual organisations may also suffer from the pandemic's impact on business and services. Difficulties in maintaining business and services continuity will be exacerbated if the virus affects those of working age more than other groups, and fear of infection, illness, care providing responsibilities, stress, bereavement and potential travel disruption are all likely to lead to higher levels of staff absence. Staffing is therefore the critical element in business and service continuity plans. Well, again, did they ever read this? Eh? We're now 425. They're using a case fertility rate of 2.5% as their upper boundary for planning purposes. And that's based on the case fertility rate for the horrendous 1918-19 pandemic. So they were obviously planning for something on a larger scale than the current coronavirus. And again in 430, this bit here. Most experts, including the World Health Organization and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, advise that pandemic flu planning should be prepared for an H5N1, that's an avian flu, pandemic virus, but not at the cost of disregarding other potential sources, which we have right now. Well, this graph looks very familiar. The daily cases as a percentage of the population, and the number of days. And when we look at it, it is based on the modelling carried out at Imperial College, University of London. This is interesting. Modelling results estimating the clinical cases, hospitalisation and deaths in thousands for different scenarios and clinical attack rates. Was this modelling done by Imperial College? It certainly matches what they've said. So this is the base case. In other words, you just allow the flu to sweep through the population. No intervention, no antibiotics. So there's 25%, which is the least severe pandemic. if it was allowed to sweep through the population, would result in between 56,000 and 375,000 deaths. Whereas the 500,000 deaths suggested by Professor Ferguson means that in this coronavirus pandemic, he thinks it's going to be a worst case scenario as suggested by the World Health Organization. Well, we shall see at the end of it whether that is correct. It explains here why they use the 25, 35 and 50% clinical attack rates in the table. This section, evidence underpinning the social measures, which we are all under at the moment. So-called social measures are potential tools which could mitigate the impacts of a pandemic by possibly reducing the rate of spread of the virus and the numbers of clinical cases. They could include international travel restrictions, health screening at ports, border closures, domestic travel restrictions, say no more, school closures again, personal hygiene advice and advising against mass gatherings. And then it goes on to say in 9.2, that first statement there, overall the scientific evidence base for developing policy and or guidance on social measures is limited. Even more limited is the evidence on the cost impacts of these measures and the understanding of how people will think and behave in response to social measures. A better understanding of these social and psychological factors is a key gap in our understanding. There's the word psychological, in other words, the effect on the mind, the effect on people's way of thinking. Mental health, in other words. Oh, that's an interesting statement. It's important to note that international travel restrictions only act to delay an epidemic. They do not reduce the size of the within-country epidemic once it occurs. Absolutely meaningless if you're stuck in Peru and they won't let you come home, or stuck somewhere else around the world and they won't let you come home. The epidemic is here and your arrival isn't going to make any difference. 9.22. This group considers specific work commissioned from the HPA and also the work described by Ferguson et al. In Nature, considering a UK epidemic. So here they come up, they're here again. Imperial College London. I wonder if the current government consulted anybody else. Got an alternative view of it. I mean, Nature is a top scientific magazine. To get an article in there is a considerable achievement. Might be worth getting hold of that and have a look at it, but it doesn't give a date. 9.29. The HPA will soon publish their analysis, this is to do with school closures, based on Christmas holidays and seasonal influenza data, which was in general agreement with Ferguson et al. On the combined effect of antiviral treatment and school closures. This analysis was also considered plausible by the group. Well, you must have been bored out of your brains by now. Especially if you're a non-scientist. But if you got this far, I'm very proud of you. Having looked through a mountain of paperwork, what conclusion have I reached? Bear with me while I read this. It looks like both the overarching government strategy to respond to pandemic influenza, produced in 2017 by the Civil Contingency Secretariat, after drawing on, amongst other evidence, papers produced by the Health Protection Agency, the HPA, and their Pandemic Influence Scientific Advisory Group, SAG, and the SAG Modelling Subgroup, and the government strategy to overcome the current coronavirus pandemic are heavily based on the modelling work of Imperial College London, including Professor Ferguson. Given their estimate of 500,000 deaths if we took no action, they seem to have chosen the worst case scenario from their model, and the current restrictions on the population reflect that. Given the controversy over the same group's model for controlling foot and mouth disease in 2001, I hope they've got it right this time, and the catastrophic effect of their advice to the government will have been worth it for all our sakes. Only time will tell. Their reputations are on the line. And what have I learned from all of this? Well, a little healthy cynicism never goes amiss. Be wary of experts, is my experience. If they wear their shirt cuffs turned up onto the middle forearm, flashy braces and brightly coloured socks, all trying to say, look at me, I'm important, be doubly aware. You'd think that after studying the same body of evidence, they would all come to the same conclusion. That's not how it works. There's much egotism within the science community, arrogance in fact. The more controversial, the louder they shout, the more woke they are, the more publicity they get. I mean, climate change is a good example. Even the prestigious Nature magazine, in which many of these experts strive to have their research published, has been conned in the past. One of the worst conflicts of experts was to do with weapons of mass destruction, WMD. Some experts said that Iraq had them. Others, including a Dr. Kelly, said they didn't. He lost the argument, and he died in controversial circumstances, although the official verdict was suicide. As a result, the Iraq War took place with decades of strife and deaths, especially of the innocent, on a scale difficult to comprehend. And it continues to this day, having spread right across the Middle East and beyond. Another, probably less serious, but nevertheless important, was to do with Brexit. I mean, which experts did David Cameron consult before embarking on his Brexit referendum, which he got spectacularly wrong? And there are many other examples of poor advice. The following was, or maybe still is, part of the GCSE science syllabus for 16-year-olds. Societal aspects of scientific evidence. A judgment or decision relating to social scientific issues may not be based on evidence alone, as other societal factors may be relevant, and there's a little list of them here. Evidence must be scrutinised for any potential bias of the experimenter, such as funding resources or allegiances. Evidence can be accorded undue weight or dismissed too lightly, simply because of its political significance. If the consequences of the evidence could provoke public or political disquiet, the evidence may be downplayed. The status of the experimenter may influence the weight placed on the evidence. For instance, academic or professional status, experience and authority. Scientific evidence provides a powerful means of forming opinions. I mean, this is useful advice for us all, but more especially for those making important decisions affecting the lives of millions of others. Well, I've bought a new book. It arrived this morning. The Politics of Crisis Management. I've just been looking at the contents. Fascinating stuff. When I've finished it, I wonder who I should put it on to. Anyway, enough. It's time to do something else. Bake a cake. Anyway, I'll see you again. Hopefully. Take care. Be safe. Bye-bye. Hey, wishful thinking, eh? Fishing is banned. Well, dream on, is all I can say.